Hello and welcome to Hosting HR with me, Leon Morley, founder of HR Recruitment Solutions. I should say Happy New Year. Let's hope for a better 2022 health-wise than the last couple of years we've all experienced. So I recently did a poll on LinkedIn where I asked whether employers were doing enough to support women going through the menopause. And only 6% of respondents said that they felt that they were. So today we're going to be discussing menopause and work with our lovely panel, which we'll introduce to shortly. But this is an interactive show. We are live across LinkedIn, YouTube, and also on Facebook. So you can get your questions across, and I'll do my very best to get those questions across to the panel through the next hour or so. So I suppose we should do the introductions. So Loretta, would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely audience?
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me on the show this evening, Leon. Yes, my name is Loretta Dignam. I am the founder and CEO of the Menopause Hub. I set it up as Ireland's first dedicated menopause clinic, first and only in 2018. Hard to believe that in 2018 there were no other menopause clinics in Ireland. I have since moved into the whole area of advocacy with the government and so on, and political parties around improving the lot of menopausal women. And we run menopause in the workplace programs for organisations and employees and employers. And just prior to that, so I've only been in the area of menopause and medical for the last couple of years, but I myself have gone through menopause, hence the motivation to set up in this area. But also I've worked for over 30 years in the corporate sector for a lot of major multinationals, particularly in the area of commercial marketing, branding and PR and communications. So that's my background. So great to be with you, and great, and congratulations to you for shedding a light on this topic. Very taboo.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. It's certainly a pleasure. Bev, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Of course. Thank you very much, Leon. Hello, everybody. I'm Bev Thorogood. I'm the director of Floresco Training Limited. We're a specialist menopause in the workplace training and coaching provider. I've been doing this for, coming up to 4 years now. And I work with businesses across all sectors in the UK, basically raising awareness of the issue of menopause and the impact it has on not just working women, but on working people across the board. It's not just a female issue, that's for sure. And I kind of got into this because of my own experience of trying to hold down a full-time job as a menopausal woman and failing miserably. And I ended up resigning in 2018. We will no doubt get into the woods and the weeds of how many women do what I did, which was to leave my job because of menopause. I'm the author of a book called The Business of Menopause, a guide for working women. And I guess my goal is to try and raise the profile of menopause within the workplace, take away some of that taboo, take away some of the stigma, and help businesses to retain what is in reality really valuable female talent that is being leached at the moment. So thank you very much for having me on the panel, Leon.
Thanks, Bev. And in relation to your book, we obviously recorded an interview with you on the HR Book Club, which is available on the YouTube channel. So if you've not checked that out yet, it is there, and certainly you can see that. So yeah, we'll certainly get that on. In fact, I don't think we've got it on there yet, but we will publish it very soon. I've just realised we've not published it yet, but it will be on there. It has been published on LinkedIn. So correction there, it will go on very, very soon. So we'll certainly get it on straight after the show, so it's there for everybody. Finally, Kathy, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thanks, Leon. Hello, everybody. I am currently, my role is Head of HR Strategic Projects at Cognizant, and I am a long-standing HR practitioner. In fact, I think this year it's coming up for about 30 years. I'm also a menopausal woman, like my colleagues here on the panel. So this is a subject that I feel particularly passionate about, and I've been advocating for menopausal women in the workplace for a few years now. I've written some policies, I've participated in affinity groups on this, and it's something I know a lot of my colleagues who are in the same age group as me roughly feel that it's a really important subject. So again, thanks, Leon, for bringing this up. I think actually the number of people that you've had sign up to this is just an indication of quite what an important subject it is, and how important it is to talk about it.
Yeah, I think we had it was over 100 that registered up just on LinkedIn alone. So that doesn't include obviously those watching on YouTube and obviously Facebook, and then obviously after that as well. We normally get a lot more people that listen after the actual live. They're not able to join us for whatever reason, whether it's childcare or other plans or whatever they're doing. So I'm sure that there'll be lots of people tuning obviously post live as well. So no, thank you, Kathy, and it's great to. This is hosting HR, so I did really want to make sure we had a HR practitioner on the panel that can look at it through a HR lens. So thank you for joining us.
It's time for 2 Lies, 1 Truth.
That's right. So 2 Lies, 1 Truth. So for those that haven't watched a show yet, this is how we get to know our panelists in maybe a slightly unusual and different way. So each of our panelists will soon reveal 3 facts about themselves, 2 of which are lies and 1 is in fact a truth. And then at the end of the show, stay tuned. We will find out which one is the truth. We've had some really bizarre and strange ones in the past. Yes, it's quite a popular feature from last year. So yeah, we decided that we'll go ahead and do it again this year. So we'll go in the same order because it makes sense. So Loretta, please tell us your 3 facts.
Okay, my 3 facts. First one is I'm in the Guinness Book of Records for building the world's largest lasagna. It was 50 foot long and 5 foot wide. We previously beat a record that was held in New York, and our record has subsequently been beaten. My second fact is that I come from a large Irish Catholic family with a lot of twins and so on in the family. So there were 15 children in my family growing up, and I am the proud mother of 9 children. After my first baby, I had a set of twins and then 2 sets of triplets. So life has been really, really busy, and none of them were with fertility treatment. And my third fact is that for a charity, I've climbed Kilimanjaro. And I did that with a group of other, I suppose, people who are interested in raising money for a children's charity. So I did that in 2017.
And just to be clear, 2 of these are lies, right? Because they're very deep. They're really like yeah. You should play poker. I think that's really good. Ev, tell us yours, please. What are your 3 facts?
I feel at a real disadvantage. I have nothing that can beat a 50-foot lasagna. Okay, my 3 facts. So you might not get it from the accent, but I'm actually a Geordie from Newcastle, and I once zip wired off the Tyne Bridge for a local charity. That was terrifying. I worked for the Ministry of Defence for a long time, and 30 years of that were working for the Air Force. And I was once really fortunate to be able to get a backseat ride in a Harrier jump jet. Also pretty scary.
Yeah.
And my third fact, again, from my upbringing in Newcastle, I was a member of a youth theatre group, and I played the lead role, a lady called Nancy, in a play that aired at the Edinburgh Festival when I was 17.
Okay. Interesting. Harrier jump jet, right? Okay. Kathy, what are your 3 facts?
Oh, I think mine are a bit dull by comparison, actually. So as a child, I was on a children's TV show, and I have done a marathon in a bra and other stuff, obviously, but bra on top, just a bra, I should say. And I once went to a bid at a hospital and tripped over my laptop bag and ended up in A&E when I cut my leg open. I have a long string of that kind of thing.
Bless. I hope that one's not true, because I wouldn't want to think of that. That's not nice. But okay. Well, anyway, we'll do the reveals at the end of the show. So obviously, if you're out there and you're intrigued and you want to guess, feel free. But yeah, we'll certainly do the reveals, and we'll find out which one of those 9 facts are the 3 truths from our 3 panelists. So let's talk about menopause, shall we? So I mean, obviously, from my perspective, I'm definitely not an expert in menopause. May not come as a shock. In fact, for me, probably it wasn't really something that I felt was really in and around my life. It's just not something that I really came across much. Obviously, ahead of doing this show, I've spoken to you guys and I've researched and kind of got a better understanding and that. But I just want to sort of throw that out there that I may ask some silly questions. So if you're out there in the audience who think I've got a question, but it might be a silly one, just go and ask it. Like, it's fine. Like, it's a safe space here. You're more than happy to do it. And I'll probably ask more silly questions than you guys anyway. So feel free, do get those questions across for the panelists. So Loretta, I'm going to come to you first, because my understanding really of menopause and my perception of menopause is that it was largely kind of hot flushes and, you know, women forgetting things. And that's what menopause was. I just wonder if you could kind of talk us through a bit more, because I mean, I spoke to my wife about this, and she wasn't completely aware about what menopausal symptoms can actually be and what ages it can actually come in and things like that. So I wondered, I know you're not medically trained, but obviously CEO of the menopause, I wonder if you could just kind of give us a bit more of an understanding about what menopause actually is, the kind of symptoms and things that women have when they're going through the process.
Leon, I was like you and your wife. And so basically, my experience was I'd never heard the word perimenopause. So a month before I turned 50, I had my last period. So basically, I was 49. And I didn't realize it was my last period, obviously, until 12 months later. But very soon afterwards, I started to get hot flushes myself. And they were the only two things I knew about menopause, that your period stopped and you got hot flushes. So, you know, eureka moment, suddenly I was menopausal. I also felt I was way too young at 49. How could I possibly be menopausal? That surely this is something that's for much older women, maybe late 50s, early 60s, late 60s even. So I was completely blindsided by this. And so I put up with symptoms for about 3 years. And they were the symptoms I knew of, which were mostly the hot flushes. I would have 20 or 30 a day. I could be presenting, you know, to a board, to other senior managers, to external investors, stakeholders, whatever. And suddenly, whew, this hot flush. I was awake at night with the duvet on and off. I used to get up to go to the loo in the night. If I laughed, coughed or sneezed, I sometimes had a bit of a leak. I had brain fog. I had very low energy. I had forgetting things and so on. So after 3 years, I went to my doctor, and it was a very quick consultation. She didn't know a lot about menopause, but she did know that HRT was safer than it used to be. And to my mind, I was giving in by going to seek help. Because surely strong women power through this was my narrative, and HRT is dangerous, my other piece. Anyway, after that visit to the GP, which was only mildly satisfactory, I went somewhere else to a menopause specialist, and it was a completely different consultation. And I exited with HRT in separate hormones that I apply transdermally through my skin, but which I also learned that all the symptoms I'd experienced in my 40s were perimenopausal. And then the symptoms in my postmenopausal phase were also so there. So really, what is menopause? So menopause is really a catch-all phrase. And what it means is it encompasses perimenopause, which is the lead up to the end of your fertility, the end of your menstrual cycle. And the hormones are fluctuating very much. And they result in these symptoms, because estrogen is a hormone in the female body that if it doesn't touch every cell, it has a conversation with every cell. So if you can think of puberty, menopause is almost like puberty in reverse as an analogy. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, because some journalists picked me up on that, but I'm saying it's an analogy. And therefore, in as much as the female changes from a girl to a woman, and there's a surge in estrogen, it's the very opposite direction at the average age of menopause, which is 51. So the average age of perimenopause is 45, and that's when symptoms can start to happen, and that's usually in the 40s, can be the late 30s. And then once the periods are stopped, the woman is considered postmenopausal, and she remains postmenopausal for the rest of her life. The average length of time is 7.4 years of symptoms between peri and post, and there are over 40 symptoms of menopause, which we divide into 3 big buckets. The first one is the psychological, emotional, or mental symptoms, and they can include things like anxiety, depression, mood swings, irritability, anger, that kind of thing. It can also be low mood, flat mood. It can also be lack of confidence. And this is where things like brain fog and memory loss can also happen. Then we have what's called the physical symptoms. So hot flushes are very famous, but you can get dizziness, palpitations, dry eye. You can have weight gain. I would have put on about 10 pounds. I had dry eye. I ended up in the local hospital in their emergency department 3 times with this. And people said to me, oh, this happens a lot to women in your age, but they never mentioned estrogen was probably the cause of it. They never mentioned it was anything to do with menopause. And so I went for a brain scan for the headaches that I had, very bad headaches. Nobody mentioned menopause or perimenopause. So there was nobody joining the dots, and I was incapable of joining the dots. So we have at the Menopause Hub something we use called a symptom checker, and it shows those 40 symptoms. So in addition to all of those physical symptoms, there's what's known as genitourinary. So that's what affects the pelvic area. So vaginal dryness, which is one thing, and that can impact on your sex life. It can be really uncomfortable for women who run, who horse ride, that kind of thing. It's one of the symptoms that gets worse as we age. But it's very highly treatable. We can also have urinary tract infections. I was plagued with those throughout my 40s and on antibiotics permanently. Little did I know some local estrogen could have helped with that. And then painful sex. So these kind of things, incontinence. And women think it's associated with aging. They think it's, because they've had children or whatever. But in reality, it was very easy for me, and it's very easy for women who are maybe unaware about menopause, to actually explain away all of those symptoms individually. And we all say stress, modern lifestyle. We're in the sandwich generation. We've aging parents, we've young kids, we're working full time outside the home. But actually, when you see it all together on one sheet, as in our symptom checker, it starts to bring a picture together. And therefore you can see, wow, there is a connection to these things. It's possibly menopause or perimenopause. So I hope I've explained, but it's really the end of a woman's fertility. And it's when she's depleted of her eggs in her ovaries and her estrogen starts to decline.
That's a brilliant summary. Thank you for that. This the 40 symptoms thing, is this something anybody can access, or is this sort of patients and customers of the Menopause Hub, or is this something online, or?
Well, it's available on our website. I'll send you a copy that you can distribute to anybody who wants to access it, but it's not private property. But we do use it with our patients before their consultation, and for women to track their symptoms, because they can come and go, and you think, oh, that was only my imagination, or that was only a temporary thing, and then they can come back, and the severity and so on. So it's kind of complex, and no 2 women's menopause is the same, because hey ho, no 2 women are the same.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this show is about menopause and work, but I think one of the things that I found when I was doing my research is actually there are a lot of women that aren't necessarily fully aware. And I think somebody on LinkedIn said before the show that we need to talk about, making sure that women understand what some of the symptoms are and things like that, because it's not really talked about. And I suppose this coming away from the work side, I mean, there seems to be a bit of a stigma about it. I think, Kathy, I think it was you, and we were talking once, and you gave an example about where I think you talked about it, and somebody said you shouldn't be talking about it, or something like that, or didn't feel it was appropriate to talk.
Yeah,
it was inappropriate. So maybe this is a good thing for you to talk about, that moment, but also in terms of why do we think there's a stigma around menopause just in society, not necessarily just to do with the workplace, but why it's not really talked about a bit more? Do you have a sort of an explanation can offer an explanation about that?
I think largely it's a women's problem. It's quite interesting listening to Loretta. You were touching on some subjects. You talked about vaginal dryness, you talked about sex, you talked about periods. They're all subjects that I think many people would find uncomfortable to talk about amongst friends and family, let alone in the workplace. I think consequently to actually sort of that creates a stigma about it, doesn't it? And so it's not very well discussed. And certainly in the workplace, really, it's 2021, and only the last couple of years we've been having these conversations about just touching on menopause and how can we support, but it's still not very common. When I've been looking for resources as an HR practitioner, it's still quite difficult to find things on it. I mean, there's certainly a lot more in the last couple of years, but I think it is just probably uncomfortable and embarrassing for a lot of people, which is a shame because it's 50% of the population will be experiencing some kind of menopausal symptom at some point in their life. And I think there's a significant number of women in the workplace, 3.5 million I read down earlier on, women in the workplace who are over 50, so therefore likely to be experiencing some kind of menopause. We should be able to talk about this. And Bev, you said earlier on, did you say there was, I think, 900,000 women a year leaving?
All right, you'll have to forgive me. My microphone's decided to fall off its stand, and it's slowly coming down. Let me
We're
just
live.
See if I can undo
This is a live show, audience. So it's not always going to be. We'll have a dog coming in at some point, I'm sure. All sorts of things can happen. We did a show about mental health, and one of our panelists, bless her, she locked the dog out the door, and the dog was at the door about sort of 45 minutes into the show, just barking like, "Let me in now. I'm ready to have some attention." It just went on for ages. So
well, sorry for that. I could just see it coming down in the corner. Yeah, I think. Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. That's a menopausal thing. Going back to the stigma, I think it's broader than this. Actually, I think it's a lot to do with the perception of older women in society across the board. I think there's historically we celebrate puberty. It's the coming of age. It's a celebration of fertility. We don't have that same level of celebration when it comes to an end, and it's almost as if I think the role of women, despite the huge changes that we've made, the strides that we've made in terms of equality, I still think there's this perception that the role of a woman is to reproduce, and if she can't do that, there's something deficient about her. I don't think we consciously think that, but I think it's so deep rooted in our psyche that there's still an element of that. So I think for a lot of women, just admitting that they might be menopausal is almost an admission that they may be beyond their useful best. That's not a truth, but I think it's certainly a belief. So until we start to change the narrative around how we look and how we see older women, especially in the workplace, but in older women in general and their worth to society, we're always going to have this stigma. And we are moving through that. I think things are changing. But it is a bigger piece than just the stigma of women's health, which, of course, that could be a completely different discussion about how poorly women's health and sexual and reproductive health has been ignored for many, many years. So I may be taking us off on a tangent, but I think it is a bigger piece than that.
I actually want to carry on that. Sorry, Loretta. So
what I was go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
No, I was going to add in that that I think as a society, definitely in the Western world, we value youth. And if I say a man with grey hair, people think wise, wisdom. If you say a woman with grey hair, you think old lady, past it, etc., etc. So, I think there's a lot to be said for what you've just said, Bev. I really do.
I think there's also, sorry, if I may just dive in, there's also this perception that menopause only affects older women, but actually one in 100 women reach menopause under the age of 40, and actually 1 in 10,000 women reach menopause under the age of 20. So actually it's not an age specific topic. It can affect women either naturally because of a condition called premature ovarian insufficiency, or it can be induced through surgery or certain cancer treatments can bring it on. So it's absolutely not an age-specific condition. So we need to move away from this link to age, because it's not that specific.
There's a question that's come in, because one of the things that, just in terms of what you were saying, Bev, obviously you were in the we know you're in the MOD for quite a period of time with the UK Ministry of Defence, and we've had a question from Sarah Harlow, which I'm going to bring up on the screen, because I'm guessing, and I may be wrong, but I'm guessing it was probably a more male, and obviously you ended up coming out of that particular position. And so I wondered, in terms of how your personal experience of there, and sort of what led you to the point of leaving that particular role and leaving your career that and an employer that you were with for 30 years. I wonder if you could perhaps talk us a little bit about that and your experience there.
Yeah, I think with a lot of women's experience, and mine in particular, I don't think I put all the dots together, as you said earlier, Loretta, in terms of what was going on for me. So I didn't have the hot flushes particularly. I did get my first one on my 50th birthday, which was a bit of a joy, but they weren't really a problem for me. The real issues for me was loss of confidence, anxiety, migraines, brain fog, poor word recall. Definitely a feeling that I wasn't performing in my job to the same degree that I felt I had been able to previously. And actually, interestingly, the feedback that I got from my boss wasn't that I was failing. He wasn't aware. He couldn't really see what I was worried about, but that didn't really make a difference because my own self-esteem, my own self-confidence were being challenged. As for it being a male-dominated organisation, you'd think that would make a big difference. I worked at a big department, or a squadron, as it's called in the Air Force, and I would think I was one of 7 women in 140 men. The stigma around menopause, I don't think was an issue. All of the women were of that sort of normal expected age range, so we talked about it quite freely. What I think the problem was for me was that I hadn't had any education. I think a lot of men think they're at a disadvantage because they don't know much about menopause, but I can reassure you all, we don't either. It hits us like a ton of bricks a lot of the time, and we're totally unprepared. So there was no education within the workplace. We could argue whether the workplace is or isn't the right place to educate women. Personally, I think it is, with so many women in the workplace who are likely to be menopausal, but we had no education. Neither did my boss. My boss was a 27-year-old man. He was incredibly supportive. I could talk to him about anything, but he'd not been given any education about menopause either. So we were both coming at this blind. And for me, the biggest fear was that I felt like I was heading towards burnout and a bit of a breakdown. My stress levels were through the roof. And I kind of knew menopause was going alongside it because of my age. I think I recognized that some of those more common symptoms were menopause, but I hadn't put the dots together about the anxiety and the brain fog and the sense that I had early onset dementia at one point. I was convinced my brain was just completely sort of, frazzled. I think that all kind of led towards the point where I thought I'm going to have to go off work with stress rather. And I'd never, ever been, I don't want to say that type of person because that sounds derogatory. I don't just, I think stress is a real thing, but I didn't want to go off work sick with stress. And I actually requested 12 months special unpaid leave. There's whole loads of other things going on in my life. That is often the case for women. It's often the case for men and women in that midlife bracket. So I had a lot of caring responsibilities, other stuff going on at a domestic level. And I asked for this period of 12 months unpaid leave, which was a policy that the MOD regularly granted. But they had a moratorium on recruitment at that time, and they couldn't. I would still sit on the head count despite not being paid, and therefore it was rejected. And I kind of felt like I had no other option but to resign because none of my problems had gone away. And I think had I been educated about what was going on in terms of menopause, I'd have probably felt a little bit more empowered to know what to do about it. My mum died of breast cancer when I was 22, so HRT was something that I was convinced I couldn't touch. I now know very differently. I understand more about it. But again, no education, poor reporting in the press, lots of other things going on that kind of took away that choice from me. I had to say there's an element of responsibility on the individual as well to go and find these things out, but you don't know what you don't know. So the MOD at the time had no education program in place for either colleagues or managers. We were all kind of coming at it a little bit blind. And I think had there been an education intervention somewhere for managers and for colleagues and a policy, perhaps things might have been different. but I don't know because we didn't have it. I have to say the MOD now have a policy in place, and I've done some training with the Air Force, ironically, about menopause in the workplace and supporting that educational piece. So it's very difficult to know that whether it was something that had everything been in place, would I have stayed? I don't know. But I think I'd have had a far better chance of understanding what I was going through, and therefore making a different choice if I had just more understanding, I think.
It's interesting. I was just looking through the comments, and it's great. It seems like there's lots going on in terms of people talking about their own personal scenario, situations and what's going on there. So I won't rattle through all of them because there's quite a bit there. But I think one of the things I thought about was I was just looking to see how many men were commenting and watching, and because obviously it's obviously it's classed a female thing, but obviously it's important that men are aware and they have an understanding, because obviously men are in the workplace and they need to be aware. And I can see Tom Nash is commented. There may be some more watching, I don't know, so apologies if you're watching and you think, oh, I'm watching, I'm male, and I'm interested, and I want to know, and I want to, we need to do more about this. I can see Adrian Dobson. So there are obviously predominantly obviously women, and a lot of comments in here of people going through sort of similar situations as to some of the stories obviously that you've mentioned already so far. One of the things that I think, just from a sort of legal perspective, because of this sort of, I think before we had conversations off air, and we talked about, for example, some of the stuff that's going through kind of legally in terms of case law in the UK at the moment. I think obviously from the perspective is is classed as a disability, how to sort of handle from there. I'm just wondering, Kathy, I know you said you did some research on some of the sort of new things that are happening in terms of that. I wonder if you could perhaps give us a bit of a snapshot of some of the latest sort of employment law updates and cases that have happened recently.
Yeah, definitely. I think hopefully the majority of people that are on this call and the majority of people that we work with will do the right thing, in terms of menopause. But we know that there are some people who need a bit of a push in this area, and it is absolutely a reputation and legal risk to treat somebody less favourably because of a protected characteristic. And although menopause isn't in itself a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, there are aspects of that where it could fall. Age is one of them. Gender is one of them. Disability, potentially, it could be seen as a temporary disability. It almost certainly for most women, it will affect your ability to do your day-to-day job for more than 12 months. And there is some case law that has related specifically to menopause. One was about disability. One was about sex discrimination. And there's one that's just gone through the courts just before Christmas, actually, that has gone back from the Employment Appeal Tribunal has been pushed back to the tribunal, and that's disability. So there is, it's gaining momentum in the courts as well. But I think I just wanted to comment on sort of men being aware of this. I had a conversation today with a male colleague who wants to understand more about it with a team member of his, which is fantastic, really great. And we did a menopause session at KPMG a few years ago. We had a lot of men there who came because they wanted to understand, came to the session, they wanted to know how they could support partners, wives, but also colleagues in the workplace. And I think the question about how we have these conversations with our colleagues, how we make it more mainstream, the conversation about menopause, I think is just talking about it, it's being open about it. And if you think about changing culture, the different parts of changing culture, a big part of that is about telling stories. It's about, I talk about it really openly. I bang on about it all the time, hence me actually being told I was inappropriate for mentioning menopause a few years ago. But I think it's really important. I have quite a few colleagues, including my boss actually, said to me, can I just ask you about this on the back of that sort of panel discussion. That's a really important, bringing that to life. I think also having a policy as well and having some supportive, and for those of you who are members of the CIPD, actually I think it might be open. There is a really good set of documents and supporting guidance documents on the CIPD website, which I think actually you can access if you're not a member. There's line manager guidance, there is policy guidance, there's even posters and marketing material, comms material that you can put up around the place. There's guidance in having those conversations with colleagues, how to bring it in and having bring it into the mainstream and have conversations to raise it. So that's available. And a really good resource as well is Channel 4. Channel 4 did one of the first menopause policies. That was, I think they released it about 2 years ago on International Menopause Day. And it's really superb. And I think it's probably what you'd call best practice in terms of menopause policy. It's out there, along with some information about how they went about it, how they pulled it together. Things like they talk about, and certainly, you know, it's an important part of policies, is creating an understanding of menopause, what it is, how it can affect you, how you can support your colleagues. It talks about the physical environment as well. So things like, you know, the hot summers that we have if we're working in the office, how people need, women need fans, perhaps their attire, their clothing needs to be adapted. And also things like support mechanisms. The conversation I had today was sort of, if you have occupational health, use that occupational health to talk about managing the symptoms, the depression, the stress, the anxiety, all of those kind of things. Absence. I think there was a conversation once about having performance conversations and absence. It affects your ability to concentrate, to work in a way that perhaps you might have done without these kind of dimensions. And I think the most important thing is being able to have an open and honest conversation with your boss, whether that's a man or a woman, and saying, you know, I'm struggling to concentrate at the moment. That might be because I didn't sleep last night, I had insomnia, hot flushes, that, you know, I spent 2 hours awake, and I'm knackered this morning. Actually, I'd like to start a bit later. I'd like to start at 10 o'clock so I can just catch up on some sleep, or have a power nap. I'm a massive fan of power naps, and I'm lucky enough to be able to work from home. Susie, I know you're on, so this is what I do at lunchtime. So I nip off for a power nap. It makes me more effective in the afternoon, and I think that's again, it's talking about this. It's saying this. It's okay to do that. It's okay to take a lunch break. It's okay to go and have a rest. Because perhaps you've missed a couple of hours sleep the night before, and of course employee assistance lines. There's lots of things that we as employers and HR practitioners, those of us on the call that are HR practitioners, can do to support people in the workplace, and it's absolutely critical that we do that. From a business perspective, we're talking about a lot of talent in the workplace. We're talking about women who are probably in relatively senior positions. And actually, I did read on the CIPD statistics that women over 50 are the fastest growing population in the workplace. That's huge. And, you know, in the context of the moment, the great resignation, we're losing people hand over fist out of the workplace through retirement, or, you know, this is an important group of people that we need to retain for all kinds of reasons: organisational knowledge, because it's the right thing to do, because we need people.
Can
Kathy,
I jump in there though? Oh, sorry, Leon.
I was just going to say, do we know the actual stats on how many women leave roles? You talked about it being the fastest, but how many are actually leaving their positions because of menopause? Do we have data on that? Bev, Loretta?
Yeah, it's estimated about 900,000 women in the UK a year. In reality, that's really hard to quantify. I mean, I left because of menopause, but I didn't have an exit interview in which I spoke about the fact that I was leaving. So I don't know how they quantify that number, but even if that's, you know, they say around about 20% of women over, you know, of menopausal age. Well, actually, what does that even mean? So it's quite hard to quantify. I think if we just accept that there are thousands and thousands of talented women leaving because they're not getting the little bit of support that they need. What I just wanted to jump in and kind of say is, though, I think there's a balance to be had here, because not all women will experience symptoms. Not all women are going to need support. They will, many women will get through this absolutely fine. What I would hate to do is label women as being in some way incompetent or unable to do their job because of menopause. Loretta, you look at what you're doing, high profile work. It's not stopped you from doing the work that you want to do. Same with you, Kathy. You're still holding down your job. You're still doing a great job of it. I started a business at the age of 52. It doesn't stop us doing anything. We just might need a little bit of temporary support to keep us working at our best. And I think we're if we're not careful, we're in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, in almost sort of sticking a tag on women. Oh, she's menopausal, she's got to be high maintenance. Well, actually, that's not true. Many of us function perfectly well. We just need a little bit of support, and that's not all of us either. So I think it's a balance. You're nodding, Loretta. I'm happy to see you nodding.
Yeah, I am, because I thoroughly agree with you. And, not every woman wants to be labelled menopausal, and people come up to and say, oh, I believe you're menopausal, or I suspect you're menopausal. Do you want some help? Obviously not. And some women don't want any acknowledgement.
No, don't do that.
But you see, do you know what I believe is? I firmly believe this is that that menopause is like mental health was maybe 8 to 10 years ago, or pregnancy was. When I announced I was pregnant, or had to tell my boss I was pregnant, it was a terrifying experience. I didn't talk much about my symptoms. I just, it wasn't a big open conversation. In fact, the clothing I wore, and my son is 28 now, the clothing I wore was to hide the bump. Whereas nowadays, it's all about showing off the bump. And there's policies in workplaces now for pregnancy, for miscarriage, for fertility. So I just think it's about progression. And I think, the research I've done in Ireland is that 80% of women are unprepared for menopause, and 66% know little or nothing. So if women are unprepared, men are equally unprepared. And therefore, they need to be involved in the loop, in the conversation, because a menopausal woman is likely to be their mother, their partner, their wife, their boss, their line manager, their teammate, and so on. And I just think we also need to think about, what have we done around mental health? If somebody has a time of anxiety, they may not want to go and seek help because it could be temporary. Others may need help. But we don't go around, pointing a finger and putting labels on people. And some of the programs, the pillars, the supports, the policies that are put in place for that can be viewed through the eyes of menopause, and you can see what suits. And I think from an employer's perspective, there are some reasonable adjustments that can be made, or reasonable accommodations for women that can be temporary, that can be cost effective or cost neutral, or, and can deliver fantastic results. So I think, it's about thinking about, what's the right thing to do, and how do we maintain the talent? How do we maintain the performance? And how do we prevent people leaving?
Thank you. We'll talk a bit more about some of the things in terms of people can do. I just want to go back to the poll part of it, because I raised it right at the beginning of the show, and then we've not really touched upon it. And I just want to get your general take on it. So if I kind of bring it back up on screen. So do employers do enough to support women going through the menopause? 6%, 84%. I'm guessing that none of you are surprised by that result. I mean, I know it's only 250 people, and there's a lot more people out there than 250. But as a sort of like a snapshot of it, I'm guessing you could probably multiply that by millions, and you probably still get 6% of people potentially that might feel. Are any of you surprised?
I'm surprised it's so low. That wouldn't have surprised me 2 years ago.
Right.
But actually, funnily enough, Channel 4 in the UK did an amazing job with Davina's documentary and raising the profile of menopause. And certainly looking at the work that I've been doing over the last 4 years, I think if I go back to when I started, even just companies with a policy, it was around about 8 to 10% of organisations across the whole of the UK had a policy. Now it's probably nearer 20-25%. And I think of the number of people that I've delivered training to in the last 12 months versus perhaps 3 years ago. Obviously, there's an element that I'm more known in this field now, but certainly I've seen a big jump in the number of companies that are actively or proactively raising awareness of menopause. So I find that number surprisingly quite low. What I would say is, chances are the people that answered the poll have an interest in menopause and possibly a reason for feeling that it's not spoken about. And it's hard to get, when you're doing a poll like that, to get a real cross section. But
Yeah.
what I'd say is it's still too low. It's still too low, whatever it's
still
doing.
too low.
And Bev, we did research in Ireland where the Menopause Hub undertook research because there was no data, and there's more data in the UK, and we're forever having to quote UK data. But we asked 1,150, and they were menopausal women, what kind of supports they wanted. And training for HR and managers came out at over 90%. Felt that they needed training for HR and managers. So 84, is that the number, 84, 90%, they're thereabouts, they're the majority. And over 90% wanted a menopause in the workplace policy. So I think those numbers, you can argue the toss over, a few percentage here or there, but they're up there in the 80s or 90s. And there's an overwhelming need for organizations to take care and listen. But the other interesting thing is that we worked with an organization, IBEC, which represents employers, and they did research. So we worked with them on that and collaborated, and they did research amongst their employer base. And their employer base came out and said that 79% of them said that menopause was relevant to them, but a huge percentage thought they were already catering for it, because they have an EAP policy, because they have a time off for medical appointments policy, because they have, access to counsellors, etc., etc. And so I would challenge organisations to look at their policies through the eyes of menopause, because they have a lot of stuff already, but nobody knows that it's relevant to menopause. So really, it wouldn't take a huge amount of adaptation to actually, and to communicate that in the organization, to communicate that they're menopause friendly, and because some of the stuff is there already.
Absolutely, I think it's a really, really good point. It is about signposting, and it's putting it at the top of the list. Yeah.
Of course, in the UK at the minute, in the UK, I don't know about in Ireland, menopause policy isn't mandatory. It's not.
Oh no, it's not mandatory in Ireland either. No.
But there are conversations being had in high places that it could be. So I guess better to get yourself, in the right position early rather than waiting until it's a mandated policy and you try to play catch up.
Bev, with your training, are you training in terms of managers for awareness for it? Are you training in terms of how organizations, like what exactly are you doing, if that makes sense, with your training company when you're working with businesses?
So we trade across the board, really. So we talk to HR teams to help them understand, why menopause is something that they should be thinking about in terms of their absence management, performance management policies. I don't profess to be an HR expert by any means. So I talk about menopause and how it may fit in. I don't talk about how they should be putting their policy together. Kathy would be far better at that than I am. But I talk to HR teams from almost, I guess, from a more consultative point of view, but I train line managers as well. And it's not just about awareness, it's also about how do you have those conversations, those supportive conversations. What do reasonable workplace adjustments look like? How do you, a lot of it is about challenging your own biases and assumptions and that kind of thing. And then I also train female colleagues as well to understand what they can do in terms of managing their symptoms. So whether that's looking at the sort of the medical, non-medical lifestyle, the whole sort of holistic view, I guess, of how you can manage. And I also I'm looking at training menopause champions within the workplace.
We do that
to kind of keep the conversation going. So women do feel like they've maybe got somebody who has had some formal training to be able to go and speak to and get some signposting if they don't feel like they could talk to their boss. Ideally, everybody would just feel like they had a great relationship with their manager, and you wouldn't need menopause champions, but we're not quite there yet. And menopause champions are great at keeping the conversation going, and great initiatives. They come back with great ones, more than I can come up with. So
They also know the organization better,
Yeah,
so therefore
absolutely.
they can, decide what will work and what won't work, and so on. So I think it's also important not only to train them about being supportive, but it's also to be confident to have that conversation. So the manager doesn't have to be an expert in menopause, but needs to be confident to be able to have that conversation, and in order to know what reasonable adjustments can be implemented within the scope of company policy and so on.
Yeah.
We talked about menopause policies quite a bit. And obviously, Kathy, you're a resident HR practitioner today on the show. So, I mean, what does a typical menopause policy look like? And if there's HR people watching this and thinking, we don't have a menopause policy, Bev's saying it might become law in the UK, we don't have anything like this, maybe we should get onto it now. I'm sure there are resources that you've mentioned, the CIPD earlier, and they're good friends of mine as well. They're customers of ours, and we do a lot of work with them. In fact, we've got the CIPD coming on the next show, so we'll talk about that a bit later. But what should that sort of constitute? What do they typically look like when you see a menopause policy? Have you got sort of much you can share in terms of that?
Yeah, I think a good policy, is a framework for how to support as opposed to restrict. And so, a good sort of entry point to a policy would include, some headlines on what menopause is, and some typical classic symptoms. That's a bit of education. And I think what would be really important in there is to say that it's applicable to everybody, so that it's not just something that's there for women or women of a particular age, that it's for everybody, men, women, managers, employees, everybody. I would include a bit on the physical environment, so how the environment can be adjusted and tailored for women who are particularly suffering from hot flushes, how to manage that in particularly hot periods of time, what support mechanisms there are available, so signposting to support like occupational health, employee assistance lines, any affinity groups that your organisation might have. And then I think things like managing absence. So it might be that as an organisation you choose to separate that out from short-term absence, that it becomes, you treat it in the way that you would a disability, talk about reasonable adjustments, which Bev and Loretta have mentioned. And then perhaps the responsibilities, so what the responsibilities of the line manager are, in terms of having honest and open conversations, adjustments, that kind of thing, but also what the responsibilities of the employee is in managing it and that kind of thing. And then I think signposting to resources. I mean, a policy, if people are going to read it, shouldn't be tomes and tomes of pages of information, but signposting to specific bits of information, maybe a guidance document for managers, a guidance for employees and colleagues and that kind of thing. And there are resources out there. I would imagine HR Inform, but CIPD stuff is there and it's available, and I'm almost certain it's accessible without membership. If you subscribe to Expert HR or HR Inform or any of those kind of document repositories, they will have that kind of thing in there. But actually just a really simple Google search, you'll find loads of stuff. And then I think it's just a question of influencing your stakeholders to support you in supporting women in menopause and agreeing policy decisions like absence and any budget for guys like this, like Loretta and Bev, coming in and educating. So I think education, support framework, signposting information and guidance.
I think the other thing, Kathy, is that the key thing is that it's not one of those policies that just sits on the shelf then, that it's actually becomes part of the culture and the sort of the DNA of the organization, so that over time it's just part of the organization and it doesn't feel unnatural. And I think that's the goal, really.
Absolutely. And as we said, when we first came on, that actually a policy is just a framework. It's just a small part of actually what organizations should be doing. The big part of this is much more cultural. It's the stories, it's the behaviors, it's the this. In fact, I noticed Liz had put something on there about, Liz Groff had put something on about attracting candidates. This could be part of what we call in HR circles employee value proposition. This is part of our we might be advertise ourselves to candidates as a menopause friendly workplace, because actually if I know I'm going to have flexible working, I'm going to be able to be supported, and when I'm managing symptoms, I'm going to choose that that employer above somebody else who wants to be in the office at 9 o'clock every day till 6 o'clock, and you know, the commute in between. I think that's a really important point.
Employer brand, employer reputation is definitely improved. You know, as a 56-year-old woman next week, I'm not in the market for a job, but I think if I was at this age, if I was offered 2 jobs and one was obviously menopause friendly and the other one wasn't, I think it would be a no-brainer the way I would want to go. In terms of policy, a lot of my clients don't necessarily have a formal policy, but they have a fabulous page on their intranet that has lots of signposting. A lot of my clients are trying to encourage colleagues who are experiencing this, not just women, but also men as well, and line managers, to do a quick video, and they're putting up stories onto the intranet site. And it's just it's a policy can be quite dry, but when you're seeing real life stories and it's interactive as a web page would be, that's proving it for a lot of my clients to be really helpful in getting people to talk up more about what they're going through and feeling safe to do it.
Yeah, not everything needs to be a policy. You know, guidance is every bit as important.
The other
thing, they're policies at HR these days, aren't they? I think that was one of the things that they've started to do in terms of just creating cultures and things like that. But I think it's good to have a sort of framework, and particularly where you need to have, I suppose, a more proactive approach to a particular topic that's been largely ignored and not talked about and everything else. Sorry, Loretta, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that also, just like in mental health, and I keep kind of harking back to that because there's a lot of great stuff that's been done in organizations around that, having an ambassador or a sponsor or something like that within the organization is really, really important. And somebody in a senior leadership position, obviously, and that can be a male or a female or both. And so I think that's something else that helps, to drive the adoption and the culture around it. And that's for many things, not just menopause, I would think.
I think male allies are very, very important within an organisation, having male allies there, sort of advocating for menopause. Otherwise, we're in danger of almost it being a female problem that we're whinging about, when actually it's not that at all. You know, so organisations where there are real male allyship does help change the culture and get the conversation moving more.
Thank you. So I'm very conscious of time. We're coming up to this sort of hour mark now that we've been live. I just want to say, for obviously those that have not watched Hosting HR before, there are lots of shows available on the YouTube channel, which you can obviously subscribe. And definitely, I hope you're all liking stuff. If you're enjoying what the panel have had to say today and the discussion today and the format of this show, we have lots of different kinds of shows, obviously aimed for the HR profession. I know sometimes in some shows that it goes a bit broader than that, and obviously, of course, these issues go far further than just the HR profession. So, but yes, there are plenty of other things out there. We also are available as podcasts, so there will be an audio recording of this available on Google and Apple and all the others, Spotify and things like that. So if you're more of a person that wants to just listen, then that's a potential option for you to listen to other shows as well. Of course, if you're recruiting within the HR space, then I would be more than happy to have a conversation with any clients who might have some needs and would like some support on that particular basis. And also we are on Twitter. So Hosting HR is available on Twitter, and I put that up earlier. So it's hosting_HR. Do give us a follow, and it'd be great. There will be highlights from this show and other shows and all sorts of things that we put on there as well. So we need to do our 2 lies, 1 truth. We need to do find out what the truths are. So we did it in order, didn't we? So we started with Loretta and all yours, which all seem true to me. So I don't know where to go. Could you remind us of your 3 facts, please?
The first one was that I built the world's largest lasagna, and I'm in the Guinness Book of Records, 50 foot long, 5 foot wide. Second one is I come from a large Catholic family of 15 children, so with a lot of twins and so on in it. And I myself have 9 children. The first was a single child, the next was twins, and then 2 sets of triplets. Another lovely Catholic family. And yes, we'd heard of contraception. And the third one is I climbed Kilimanjaro for a charity with a group of other mountain climbers who are charitable too, for children's charity in 2018.
Okay, so Kathy, what do you think? Which is the truth in that?
Oh, it's a tough one.
Because they're all so absurd.
Do you want to come in while Kathy's still deliberating on that one? It's,
do you know what? I don't know, because I think your middle one is probably close to the truth, but the numbers aren't quite right.
A lot of people do that, I've noticed.
Yeah, I am desperate for it to be the lasagna, so I'm going to pump for the lasagna.
Lasagna, Kathy?
Yeah, I think so.
See, I want it to be the lasagna as well, but I'm not going to go full house because it just seems like it's not right. I'm going to go for the Kilimanjaro for charity. I think that's awesome. I could totally see you battling through that and doing that. So that's our call. So go on.
You want me to give the big reveal?
Yeah.
In the Guinness Book of Records, world's largest lasagna.
Fantastic. Did you eat it as well?
We gave it away to Meals on Wheels and other charities. But yeah, that's my treat.
I hope it was tasty, because that is I don't even, there's lots of questions I have around that now, but we are wrapping up the show, so we won't get to how on earth you cook.
That's made my evening.
I'm glad it wasn't the 9 children.
No, yeah, I meant to say. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Listen to the size of your family. I wasn't sure if the lasagna had been made just to feed them.
Yeah. Go on, Bev. What were your 3 facts? Remind us.
Oh gosh. So mine were that I zip wired off the Tyne Bridge.
Yeah.
That I got a backseat ride in a Harrier, and that I played the lead lady in a play at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Kathy, Loretta, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to go for the Harrier.
Yeah, that's cool. And it could happen, but I don't know if they just like throw you in a jump jet for fun. I don't know. But then you work there. So, yeah. Okay, so Loretta's going the Harrier ride. Kathy?
I think you've been on stage.
On stage. And I'm going for the other one because I'm a big Newcastle United fan, which you've seen my little shirt there and things. And I can imagine, I think there's something... I don't know. I'm just going to go for the zip wiring off the Tyne Bridge. I think that's really awesome, by the way, and I totally would not do that. So which one is it, Bev? Let us know.
I wouldn't zip wire if my life depended on it. I did work at Harrier Squadron, and I did manage to get my husband a backseat flight in the Harrier, but I couldn't get my own.
Acting, Edinburgh.
I did play
amazing.
For boys at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival when I was
17. That's amazing. Well done. That's an incredible achievement. That's really cool. That's really cool. So Kathy, yours, children's TV, I remember. Bra, I remember.
Marathon.
Yep. So I auditioned for a TV show. It was on a children's TV show. Did a marathon in a bra and tripped over my laptop bag at Bedford Hospital and ended up in A&E having stitches.
I'm going to go for the third one, the hospital.
I think that's true.
I want to do this like they do on the television and say, which TV show was it?
We're not allowed questions. We haven't got time for that.
We're
going to dial straight out of this. Viewers are down with questions.
Everyone's gone home.
I think I'm going to go for the bra. I think maybe you've done a charity for cancer or something like that.
And I'm gonna also go for the third one. I really hope that's not true though, because that's a really sad thought. But that's my one as well. So I'm going the same as Loretta.
Okay, so I did actually trip over my laptop bag and cut a massive hole in my leg, but it didn't get to go to A&E because we had to go straight into the presentation, so I had to patch it up.
Oh no.
So the truth is that I've done a marathon in a bra.
You did.
Done some research,
wow.
yeah.
Woo!
Wow. Oh, well done. I assume you raised lots of
Fantastic.
money for that. That was
We
quite a
did,
brave
yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah.
Well done, well done. So thank you obviously for joining us out there and being involved in the chat. I hope you found it really, really useful. The next show that we're going to be doing, in fact, I should thank you to you three ladies as well for your participation and your knowledge and wisdom and everything else. I'm hopeful this will make a difference to people. That's really, really important. Our next show is going to be on the 9th of Feb. We're going to be discussing HR trends for 2022 with two returnees, actually. Tom Hack from the HR Trends Institute and globally renowned as one of the experts in HR and a wonderful, wonderful chap and friend as well. So he's going to be back. And we've got Perry Timms, another returnee and wonderful HR professional as well. And he's going to be obviously discussing those trends. And then we've also got Georgina Powell from the head of people at the CIPD. Who I've been working with recently, and so we've got a real sort of nice panel there to discuss some of the new things that are happening with HR. So really, really looking forward to that. I really hope that many of you will join us again on the 9th of February. Tell your friends, tune in. Please still like. If you've not watched it live, those likes still help for it to go out further, and share. And if you're on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. I've got some exciting stuff happening this year on YouTube, which I won't reveal any of them yet. But I've got some really innovative, well, I think they're innovative. I don't know anyone else is doing them. So some new things coming up on the YouTube channel. So please do subscribe. Kathy, Bev, Loretta, thank you very much.